start. We're already live on YouTube. That's good. Some people are still entering here. If you would have so many people entering a room physically, it would take a bit longer. We're almost at 100, so just half a minute. Still going up, so I have to wait. I'll just wait a few seconds more, and then we'll kick off. Even in online events, you can have a few latecomers, right? Sneaking into the room when we're already started. That's okay. Okay, I think we can start. It's the number sort of stabilized around 100. So 100 people made it on time. And as you can see, we are running this event with a few people. So I am Leonardo from Florence School of Regulation. I'll be the moderator. We have two researchers, Atir and Tim, that will integrate some of their work into this discussion. And it is a discussion on research we think is relevant for regulators. So we have two regulators here. We have Jorgen from Norway, and we have Pauline from Belgium. And both of them are very closely involved also in the topic of flexibility. So we have a few flexibility experts here to kick off a discussion with all of you. And I have a few slides prepared just to guide the discussion. So most of it will be a debate between us. Let me kick off by just reminding you the title. So you know that flexibility is really an important topic today because we believe it can play a big role in electricity markets, but also in networks, maybe even avoiding some of the investments we would otherwise have to do in networks. So that's the title. But there is also something else that is new. We have events already for a long time at Florence School of Regulation, but now we have event series. And this event is part of a series we call FSR Insights. And why is that? Well, because it's based on some of the insights we have as the result of our research. So if you like this format, know that we will organize once a month, every time on a Wednesday around this time, this type of event. And in the other weeks, the other Wednesdays of the same month, we'll be running other series. So as you can see here, besides FSR Insights, we also have FSR Talks, Conversations, and Debates, and they will be running on the other Wednesdays of the month, right? So, and as you can see there in that announcement, we're kicking off this new approach to online events this month. So you are part of the first to experience the new approach we have. Now, why did we pick the topic of flexibility right now? Well, first of all, 16 July, as you can see, CER produced their latest paper with some views on how DSO procedures could look like in the future to procure flexibility. So that's something we will start the debate from that paper. And also in the background, there is a European process going on where you might know that there was a consultation by the European Commission on what could be the priority list of network codes, right? Because a lot of what we discuss on flexibility relates to the directive part of the clean energy package. So the directive can be implemented in different ways in different countries, but it also foresees that maybe there will be a network code, and not maybe, because the consultation concluded that there will be a network code on flexibility, and that will be one of the first we will see in this new generation of network codes. And in that code, maybe we already start to harmonize some of the initially national approaches to flexibility. So I think both of these situations motivate us to organize the debate. And then, okay, there is a lot of different subtopics under flexibility. And as you will see, we've selected 3 of them. And for each, we will ask you what you think. And then we will have a discussion. So let me just jump immediately to the first one on implementation of flexibility markets. So what does the CER paper say on that topic? Well, as you can see, we took 3 paragraphs out of the paper. In the first paragraph, the regulators are basically saying, you know, there will be tenders, but the way we organize these tenders, we should really be mindful that we're not sort of unwillingly discriminating one type of player or technology over the other, right? So we should really take care of that. Second issue they highlight is standardization. Should we have fully standardized products? And what does that even mean, standardized products for flexibility? And the third one is, okay, flexibility is procured at DSO level to solve congestion. So that means that there will be a location element in that procurement, but how will that work exactly? That's a bit of an open question. So you could say that we have here 3 open issues regarding flexibility markets. And to kick off a discussion with you, the audience, we wanted to know which of these 3 is most on your mind. Maybe you will say all 3, but if we force you to choose, what is really a concern to you when different countries will implement flexibility markets? Is your main concern this technology neutrality issue? Is it more the product standardization, or this whole story of locational tagging? And normally you should all already see the possibility to vote. You can just click, then we will share the results when we have enough of you that voted. Okay, so here you have the results. Nicely spread, I would say. So we cannot say that one of these 3 is irrelevant. Clearly, different people, if they are forced to choose between one of them, select another one. So before we say what our research says about this topic, we would like to know from Jorgen and Pauline, who have been also involved in writing that CER paper, you know, what are a bit the discussions among regulators beyond what we can read in the paper. So who will go first on this one? Maybe you, Jorgen?
Yeah, so I would actually answer product standardization. So to me, I think locational tagging might be the most straightforward, at least from the bits themselves. And also it could be fairly easy to decide on the area on where they procure. I also would say that the technology neutrality of the procurement process can be tried to be ensured by creating some form of template. So in our report, that's what we try to do with a more or less a 5-step process, where you make the flexibility demand clear so that the users must signal and publish their need. The request should be as broad as possible, and you must define the requirements properly. But for the product design, depending on what problem to solve, the DSO specification could vary significantly. And the difference between, let's say, bits in the high voltage level and the lower ones are that all of the lower ones need to be based on a given baseline. So if you have 6 different products, that means that you will have to create a unique baseline for all of these. So especially the standardization of baselines, I would say, is maybe the most challenging from my point of view.
Thank you, Jorgen. And this is already nice to hear from you that you consider baseline as a key element of product design. Pauline, please, can you give us your opening thoughts?
Yes, hi. I think I agree with Jorgen, but I think what is also very important is that the barriers for all technologies to participate are removed, because it's probably the easiest for production units to participate in flexibility markets, but demand response or storage or other technologies are really do also have a lot of potential, but the requirements that are there or that you use if you standardize might not be completely optimal for demand response or storage. So I think barriers so that everybody, if you have a tendering or if you have a market process, that everybody can participate is also very important. And a second thing I would think is participate in flexibility markets is that you have good liquid markets, the competition is fair. So you need to have some rules regarding that as well. So that will be my point of view. And okay. Also that if you organize a market, that it is fair to society, because it must be the best solution for society as a whole. You don't have a market just to have a market. It must be there because it's the best solution.
Thank you, Pauline. Let me also already pick up a question we got in the chat box. And I really encourage all of you to put questions there. Sometimes I pick them up immediately, or I can pick them up at the end. So Simon asks us to clarify, did the Commission already decide to work on this new dedicated demand-side flexibility network code, or is it not yet final, that decision? So, and another question he has, a concern, is are these local flexibility markets really necessary, or can it not be harmful for the whole European target model and the whole discussion on bidding zones? Not a light question, right? So who would like to take this one to start with? Jürgen, you're making a move, so I'll give you the floor.
Now, for the first one, I don't know, to be honest. But for the second one, the more liquidity with the bidding zones, I would assume to be more on products for the balancing markets. So now we're talking more on the local level for lower voltage congestion, so to say. But if these bids are to be aggregated and be engaged in cross-border trade, they will have to be standardized. And here we have the whole electricity balancing guideline and all those other processes. But I wouldn't assume that you can exchange local products across borders.
Thank you, Jürgen. Pauline?
Yes, I would like to add to that it depends also for what you're using the flexibility, of course. I think we focus on flexibility markets to solve congestion problems, and those are mostly local. So of course, the local market will have an impact on the European market, but it will be difficult to have a resource in I don't know, in the Netherlands to solve a local congestion problem on a medium or low voltage grid in Belgium. So I think it's important that those markets do not have a bad impact on each other, or that they may be integrated. That's another discussion, but there needs to be a local market to solve very local problems. Otherwise, you have other forms of flexibility, but they must cooperate, I think. And you also have long-term markets and short-term markets, and it depends really on which problem you want to solve.
Thank you, Pauline. Tim, you also would like to intervene?
Yes, thank you, Leo. So I also read that indeed NSOE and the DSO associations, they already started with their working groups. So that would partly answer the first question. Thank you for also the participant. I cannot read the name now who answered that. Regarding the second one, like, do we really need these flexibility markets? I mean, academics also recognize that there are flaws in these flexibility markets and in their integration. But what is the alternative? The alternative, as Seer and others also mention, is okay, there are tariffs, there are administrative measures, there are maybe topology changes, but in the end, these things probably won't solve it all. So the question is then what is best? Just to build out the grid as much as possible to avoid the flaws of these other instruments and the flaws of flexibility markets, or just try to do that, and in the end you have to deal with it in reality with these issues. And about the impact on liquidity, it's about like, where do you allocate these resources in the most cost efficient way, whether they can be used for congestion, for balancing, for energy. Often one activation can actually do all three at the same time. But this is of course easier said than done. If we look at the implementations of some of these flexibility markets, like say earlier pilots, what some do is they say that, okay, you can bid your flexibility on our platform, and if we don't use it for local congestion management, we take care of forwarding it to other relevant markets, being it balancing or the intraday market. So that's one way to avoid, let's say, negative impacts on other markets. But in the end, as we will also discuss, there's still much room for implementation and challenges.
Yeah, this nicely bridges to the research. So I'll just share the one slide, Tim, so you can talk us through on what your research says so far on these three issues, right? These three very relevant issues. So let me share that one slide you prepared.
Yes, so recently in the context of the Interface Horizon 2020 project, we looked at the implementation of 4 flexibility platforms. We call them pioneering projects because they're actually being implemented. They're actually resources bidding in that market and congestions being solved today. So it's more than a small pilot. We looked at several design dimensions of these 4 projects, of which also the 3, let's say, implementation challenges that we discussed today. So as Pauline also mentioned regarding the first one, technology neutrality of the procurement process, we interpreted whether you would have long-term procurement or short-term procurement. Like Picloflex is an example which actually holds an auction, let's say 6 months or 1 year before you would actually then activate the flexibility in real time. This, you could call it that this is not really technology neutral because some resources might have difficulties like thinking about how much far ahead of time will I be sure to really deliver this? Think about demand or maybe storage, while other resources like generators will have less trouble with that. But what is the advantage of long-term procurement is that if you reserve it long ahead and you make sure that the people will deliver it by penalty systems, then you're sure it will be there when you really need it. So the alternative would be to have only short-term procurement, meaning in the intraday time frame. So this makes it easier for let's say, demand to really participate because shorter term, they can better forecast what flexibility they can use. But that, if your use case is really, if we don't have that flexibility, we would have to curtail demand administratively, maybe you don't want to rely on that. And maybe in the beginning, when you only have short-term markets, there's not enough liquidity because there's not enough players. So you somehow need to kickstart this market to get it going. And the moment you have enough players, maybe you start with long-term and then you do short-term, then the short-term would work. So we see that these projects, which is described in the paper, are somehow never one is only long-term or only short-term. They're always thinking about how to combine the two in order to avoid these pitfalls, which I mentioned. About product standardization, it's true that the way you standardize or the way you define product, you can really let's say, favor one resource over the other. We see that nodes is very innovative in that regard because they really allow flexibility providers to somehow choose over a big set of parameter options to then define, for example, have a very fast green resource. Okay, so maybe that has a value. While the other projects, they have standardized products like you would have in the intraday market or now in the European balancing platforms. The advantage of standardized products is that you would really create a merit order and strong competition. But then, of course, you need to design them in a way that they are technology neutral or non-discriminative, which is also to be seen. About locational tagging, Jürgen said this is maybe an easier one. I'm not so sure. We saw different ways of doing it. Gopax being a kind of an outsider in that regard. Gopax is a platform in the Netherlands. So they allow flexibility providers to tag their bid depending on its postal code. They don't define zones. They only say, if you have this bid which can be used for solving congestion issues, give us your postal code. And then it's up to the DSOs and TSOs who somehow jointly do their analysis to activate which bids they need. So they can activate one bid up in, let's say, one postal code or one bid down in another postal code in order to solve an issue. This is very different from Picloflex, Enera, and Nodes, where they really define zones. So really local zones, which are then competing for a local issue. So I don't think that this is already completely settled. And I think it depends a lot on how exactly the market is organized, whether it's integrated into other markets or not. So this would be what our research is saying about these, for now, open questions. If you want to read more, you can find the paper open access online.
I have to unmute. Thank you, Tim. So Jürgen, Pauline, maybe Pauline first. Anything you would like to react to, challenge what Tim just said, or can you relate to what he was saying?
I can relate, and I think the issue of the choice of long-term contracts versus short-term is a really interesting one, because in the past we also heard of demand response providers. They said they prefer long-term contracts because then they have a steady income, and so they have more time to go to grid users and convert them into resources. And if they have a stable income, then they know they are selected, then they are more able to do so, versus short term. If you have an auction, then you're not sure that you're going to be selected. So it's true, short term is better because you can forecast a lot more less in advance, but versus the stable income. And it also really depends on the flexibility product. Like if you like Piccolo are looking for replace a long-term investment with a flexibility product, and an investment is there for, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years. So you have to be sure that your flexibility product is going to be there for a long time as well. Versus if you look at shorter term stuff, the answer might be completely different. So it's a very interesting discussion that's not black or white. So it should be interesting to see the results of those pilot projects as well. On the locational issue, I'm open as well. I don't know. But standardizing products so that the liquidity is higher, I'm a big fan of that one. But it really depends on the need of the flexibility product as well. So standardization, yes, but not the same product for every need as well. A standardization per need, that I think is a good in-between solution.
Thank you, Pauline. Jürgen, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, so I meant that the locational tagging of the bids themselves were maybe quite easy, but how you kind of draw the dynamic zone, couple it to the topology, and then link the bids, that's a bit more challenging. And when it comes to the longer or short-term procurement, I just want to highlight that there are a vast number of both EU-funded initiatives and national demo projects where we try to encourage them all to, along this timeline towards the operational hour, where are you actually engaging in a contract or doing trade? Is it long term with, like you said, with a reservation or option with a reservation or activation costs? Are you more in the midterm? Are you going into day ahead to go into the balance, or are you operating kind of after gate closure with the balancing hour? So if it was possible to set up an overview of all these projects, I think we would see a lot of similarities, and it will also be easier to ask more specific questions when we actually know when they are trading.
Thank you, Jürgen. Let me also already say to Christine, who wrote a message in the chat box, that she would like us to discuss also the interaction between different instruments. And we also want to do that. And that's the last thing we will discuss. So don't worry, stay tuned. Then Sami still wants us to elaborate a bit more on the location element, because he's saying, why are we not just using the individual ID or meter or whatever? Are we not doing that because we want aggregation to be possible? Or what are the trade-offs there between using zones and maybe going to more specific locations? Can you maybe say a few more thoughts about that? And then we move to the next topic. Who would like to come in here? Tim?
It's not an easy one, but it's again that the more local you go, the more, let's say, direct you can solve an issue. The less local you go, the more competition you can have, because you would have more resources. I know, for example, that Copex is interesting, that they look at maybe one resource is a bit more expensive if you look at the bid, but it's located in a way that it would be way more effective to solve one problem with a certain activation, let's say 1 megawatt up or down, then 1 megawatt up or down in another location, which is cheaper because it has an effect, a different effect on the congestion. So you see already how difficult it becomes when you think about like locationality of these bids and how to compete, because not even two resources with a different price, which might be close to each other, could have the same effectiveness to solve a problem. So you have to calculate this then, which is far from obvious.
Yeah, Pauline?
I think that issue really depends as well on what we describe in the paper called observability. There's a matureness needed from the DSO in the way how he observes his grids. Is it a smart grid? Does he have does he see in real time what's happening on his grids? Some DSOs they do. Others they don't. Some have medium voltage real time. They can see everything, but not in the low voltage. So just say each customer, and we put them in a big database and it's solved. I think the first step will be to mature the distribution grids, and it really depends on the DSO and how far along that curve they are. But it will not solve everything just to put everything in one database, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Pauline, for some sense of reality here. Okay, let me also quickly answer a technical question. So Mathieu is asking, can we also get the questions? It might be that some of you are connected through the app, some of you are connected through the browser, and this can partly explain why you do not necessarily see everything. Next time, please go through the app, because then you will have the full experience. I think that can explain the question. Okay, let's go to topic number 2. Here we go. So we were at the work of Tim, and now we move to the work of Atir, the second researcher working on flexibility at FSR. So back first to the CER paper. So again, as you can see, we selected 3 quotes there, but just high level. Basically, the way we understand the paper is that regulators say, let's try out these flexibility markets with all their imperfections, right? We all know that. But if for some reasons flexibility markets are not working well because there is market power or other issues, we might need to resort also to more administrative measures to enable flexibility. And what does that mean? Well, one way is that you just have an agreement that you can curtail maybe renewables at distribution level or demand at an administratively determined price, compensation, right? And then ideally that compensation is based on the lost value, right, for the ones that are being curtailed. And then you enter into a more difficult discussion on what is the real opportunity cost, or what is a fair compensation. And to kickstart this discussion, we again have a poll here for you. So I mean, I think in most countries had already a discussion on how to curtail renewables and what is a fair compensation. I think on demand, it's still somewhat more new topic. So that's why we're focusing here on curtailment of demand. So if we would curtail demand, is then the correct level of compensation this famous value of lost load, which is typically a quite high value, and CER also and Acer are working on what are good methodologies to calculate that value. Do you think it should be lower than vol, or do you think it should be higher than vol, right? These are the 3 options. And again, you can vote for one of the 3. And vol can still be country specific, right? But every country has, for other purposes, an idea of what vol is. Okay, so you're quite spread between the below vol and vol, while a minority really wants to make some money here and wants more than vol. Okay, so again, I would just like first maybe to our regulators to share a few thoughts, and then we'll go to the research of Atir. Pauline, maybe this time we start from your end.
Very sensitive question. Because if you participate voluntary, it's always something else than if you're participate mandatory. I did a study on it, on compensation for production, and there the agreed the agreed price was the cost of not producing. So if you put the same, it's the cost of not being able to consume or have your load, of course. So it would be the fall, but I think it will definitely depend on the type of customer. So you have a lot of different customers, and maybe you will talk about it, and it will probably be very different from one customer to another, and also one customer will be wanting to pay for it and another one not, and that's also a difference. So the administrative scheme is also that the compensation is fixed, but if you participate or not, that's free. And I think that's the thing in between. With the administrative approach, you're not obligated to participate, but if you participate, the price is fixed, and that will help, I think, to have to have those customers that will participate, but not everybody, and that can be a different context to determine the compensation.
Okay, thank you, Pauline. Jörgen?
Yes, my answer is also quite simplified, but I would say I agree that it's equal to or less than the value of lost load, but will decrease with competition, hopefully. And also from your report, I saw that the vol will also decrease if you're noticed from before. So it's more or less short answer.
Which is a very nice intro to you, Atir. Already references being made to your report. So I will let you share, just like Tim, a few highlights. Here we go. We have 2 slides for Atir, and this is the first one.
Yeah, well, if you are not convinced about market-based flexibility procurement, we try to show you in this paper how an administrative measure would look like. So we modeled a bi-level game where a DSO would decide on the trade-off between the flexibility, the demand-side flexibility levels and the investment in the network. And we had also at the other side, at the other level, consumer, which could be prosumer or passive consumer, and that will pursue their self-interest and try to optimize their own welfare. So for this case, and to see how the compensation level impacts this game, we tried to show you here 2 cases, both here for passive consumer with a low compensation that is lower than vol, and with a high compensation that is we consider equal to vol. And what we found first is that with the low compensation, there is actually a higher welfare gain from demand-side flexibility, and also there is a higher flexibility, demand-side flexibility level procured. And you would think that if you see that the demand-side flexibility level for low compensation are higher, it could be a bit strange as a result, because you would expect that maybe for passive consumer, it's always better to curtail them at vol. However, this is not the case. So what is behind this graph on the right, we will see it in the next graph, which is related to the behavior of prosumer. Yeah, next slide. And yeah, here is another type of graph. So for the prosumer with a low compensation on the left side, you see in red their baseline prosumer profile, which is in which they react in a quite cost-efficient way. So they inject they reduce their consumption by using their battery during the night peaks. For a low compensation. However, when we go, or when they know that there is a high compensation equal to vol, they anticipate that and they gain their baseline to inject electricity when it's not needed for the DSO, so that the DSO has to curtail them so that they benefit from this high compensation. So this shows that maybe if we curtail at vol, there is gaming possibilities from the prosumer, that because they value electricity lower than the passive consumer, and in this case it's too attractive for them to get curtailed, so they behave in not non-cost efficient way towards the social welfare. Yeah, this is my feedback on the our result on this, and we obviously find that it's, as it was said in the CIR report, it's not trivial to set the compensation through administrative measure.
Thank you, Atir. And as I also asked to Jorgen and Pauline, because they referred to that issue in the CER paper, but we were not aware of an academic study that actually tried to model this sort of gaming you could get, right? So I think it's quite nice that Atir managed to put some quantification to that issue that we all know could exist, right? So, and of course, every academic paper has its limitations. So what we looked at here is a case where the compensation is not different for the passive as for the prosumer, right? So, and this prosumer is then gaming with batteries and PV. But I think Pauline already indicated that administrative measures could be measures that give different compensations to different type of users. So maybe you could pick up on that. Is that possible, you think, from a regulatory point of view? Is that already being done? Or would that be hard to sell? Because it seems to be a key element in how that will work. Or anything else you would like to react to, Jorgen or Pauline? I'm looking at both of you. Who wants to go first on this one? You're both smiling, so let's go for Jorgen.
No, I can't really answer. I can just say that, you know, there's never a first best option. So, you know, we have to, if the failures of the administrative approach can be as big as the failure in the market. But of course, if you base it on an administratively set value of lost load, you will have to differentiate on different sorts of consumers, probably at different times and so on. So it would be much more complicated organizing this from one center unit, that is the regulator, compared to the market organizing itself. So
yeah, indeed. So I fully sympathize with all of you regulators that would have to develop a scheme for that. I don't know if there are already examples of regulators that have tried to differentiate these compensations.
It depends on what you mean. There are some examples, I think, in Austria and Switzerland that have separate schemes for boilers and heat pumps, and they can be curtailed for certain periods of time. And then they get more interesting. I'm not sure if it's supply or tariffs, that you need to ask the people who are from those countries, but it exists. But I think if you look, it also depends on how you define an explicit demand response, of course, because you can do it through tariffs, but you can also organize it as a completely separate process, like that it's an ancillary service. And then if it's an ancillary service, you have a non-frequency ancillary service. That's also an article in the SEP. Then you have the whole framework there, which can be, you can organize through a market, or the regulator can decide with a certain process that it's not a market, and then you can have a compensation for it. But it has to be on certain terms, so it's not so easy to do. And also, I think you can have curtailment, but you can also have the opposite, that you increase your consumption to solve a problem. So in any case, I think in my personal opinion, it would be better to have a completely separate framework that is not part of the tariffs, but that it's a flexibility or an ancillary services product, which you are obligated or not to participate in for a certain. And then you have all the other questions, but that would be an important distinction for me.
Okay, we also have a clarification question here from Sami asking, what Atir modeled is a kind of mandatory scheme. It has compensation, but it's still mandatory. So would you regulators qualify that as market-based or not at all? So what is market-based for you? Is it enough to have compensation or not? Jorgen?
It would be a voluntary delivery, yeah. Okay. So with agreed price.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say mandatory curtailment is
okay.
fully market-based now.
Okay, clear answer. Pauline?
I agree with Jürgen. It's not a market-based approach if it's mandatory.
Okay.
We actually have an interesting chapter about all the different types and how they combine with each other in the paper. So you can
there you go. So all of you don't only have to read Tim's paper, Atir's paper, but also the CER paper. And this will clarify a lot. Let's move to the third topic, because we're exactly around 20 minutes, and Christine was already asking for it, about interaction between instruments, because I think the last few years we've been discussing a lot about tariffs, right? How tariffs can give better signals, how maybe we will use flex markets, we will maybe use also still some mandatory schemes, and all these schemes together, you know, somehow have to make sense, right? So, and that's the next, I think, big challenge, is that we don't look only at instruments individually and what is a good way to design them, but also how to combine them. And so that issue, again, is also raised in the CER paper. And yeah, it's just, you know, reminding all of us that tariffs and all that are part of the solution, right? So, and I think in the taxonomy now, more and more we talk about implicit. I think that's both academics and practice is more and more saying, you know, if you give signals through tariffs, network tariffs, or dynamic retail prices, right, that this is what we call implicit, you know, enabling of flexibility. And then you have something that is explicit, and within explicit you have many different ways of procuring a mandatory, voluntary, this flexibility, right? So then we wanted to ask you a last question on this interaction. So what do you think? And this time, again, Atir's work is more specifically on network tariffs as one form of implicit, and curtailment of demand as one form of explicit enabling of flexibility. And then we have a few statements here. So do you think these two can be designed independently, so there is no significant interaction? Or do you think that if network tariffs become more cost reflective, will it then be less or more opportune to curtail demand instead of investing in the grid? So either it's less or more, or you think, boo, I don't think there is a strong interaction. You should just design your tariffs and then you procure flexibility. This one you probably have to think a bit more. Okay, so you're again nicely split. Huh? There is a minority that says no significant interaction. And then the others are nicely split between it is more or less opportune to curtail demand. So are they substitutes, or are they more complementary in terms of instruments, basically, right? So let me again first ask opening thoughts by Pauline and Jürgen, and then I'll ask Atir to share, this time without graphs, just some thoughts from the paper.
Yes, I can go first.
Go ahead.
So I can reference back to what Pauline said about observability. That means the DSO's capability of describing the current and coming state of their network. So we have to remember that we come from a situation where we only had at least real-time measurements at the interface at the high and medium voltage level, and you basically do nothing beneath this area. But now with the introduction of smart meters at the connection points and at the distribution transformer, you are more likely to have an image of how you're actually utilizing your capacity. So when you're then introducing more cost-reflective tariffs, which primarily objective is to, of course, have a more fair distributions of the firm costs. And secondly, you allocate, or you give an incentive to long-term adaptation or adoption to that capacity. But both the strength and the weakness of the tariffs is that they have to be objective and non-discriminatory. So equal customers must have the same tariff, no matter if the grid they're connected to have a good capacity or a lower ones. But so this information combined with how the customers react to the tariffs make you at least better able to pinpoint places in your grid where you need to either reinforce or procure for, flexibility. So I would say you go more from guessing to knowing, and you're thereby more opportune to engage in the procurement. And as you already have the observability in place to be able to describe this, then you're also more opportune to search for a more market-based technical solution to that problem. So they are indeed complements, in my opinion. But once again, the tariffs can be capacity-based, can be everything from subscribed capacity to time of use and so on. So it's they can also be substitutes if you also have a fully dynamic tariff. But once again, it's implicit, so your customers don't have to respond to it, as opposed to the market-based where you have a contract.
Thank you, Jörgen. Pauline?
Not an easy question. It also depends, of course, but I think Jörgen is right. Tariffs are for everybody, and not everybody will participate in flexibility. So the tariff should not have barriers for flexibility, but if they really should encourage it, it's an open question. So I think I don't know the experience in other countries, but we've investigated implementing dynamic tariffs, and so not time of use tariffs, but really dynamic tariffs, and it's very difficult to implement. You can do it, but you need observability. It's one thing, but you also have a big issue of fairness. So you have customers where the congestion problem is, and they have another tariff than the customers who don't have the congestion problem. It's difficult to be fair and to have purely on location, because where you live, it's difficult to have fairness in that type of tariffs. So what we prefer is to have simple cost reflective tariffs, but among other criteria as well, and to, like I said, to have flexibility products and ancillary service products that solve the congestion problem that are completely separated. The mandatory curtailment, yes or no, I don't know, but we would not do it through the tariffs. Probably. I know we have to investigate it further, but that would be our point of view up until now.
Thank you. Atir, what are your current thoughts at this relatively early stage of the PhD? So you still have a few years to develop these thoughts. Huh? You're muted, Atir.
Indeed, it's not a trivial topic to address and to start with. Well, for our model, we found at least that these two elements, the implicit demand-side flexibility that are network tariff that we model as capacity-based, and the explicit demand-side flexibility that is a mandatory curtailment, interact. And in our specific case study, we found that the more cost-reflective your tariff are, the more there is a room or a potential for demand-side flexibility. And however, when you have partly cost-reflective tariffs, then consumer will behave or are not incentivized to behave in a cost-efficient way, and then the overall welfare gain from explicit demand-side flexibility is less. Well, we can make the the example of the link with the use of the demand-side flexibility in cases where the congestion or the problem is non-frequent, because we could consider that the cost reflectivity or the non-cost reflectivity of network tariff is kind of a structural problem. So it will be too expensive to deal with it with demand side flexibility. So in this case, it's always better to build the network rather than to try to fix this structural problem with explicit demand side flexibility, because we found that it won't help in our case, and it's better to build the network in this situation.
Yeah, so I think if I would summarize it, I would say Jorgen and Pauline are saying, yes, we will have cost reflective tariffs, but they will be somewhat simplified. And to solve that simplification, we will need to procure flexibility, right? So that's to address the shortcomings of the tariffs. But then Atir is saying, yes, it is true that if you have these more simplified tariffs, you will need maybe more flexibility, but to solve it, it will cost so much that you might prefer to invest in the grid, because if the problem due to too simplified tariffs becomes so big, cost benefit wise, right? You might not necessarily address it with curtailment, but you might address it cheaper with investment, right? That's a bit the insight, I think. Pauline?
I have one big addition to that, and that's it's also part of the clean energy package is the development plan. And I think part of the development plan should be this methodology for the DSO, whether for a certain condition, will he invest in the grid or will he procure flexibility, especially for medium voltage grids where investments are higher, maybe not for low voltage grids, but medium voltage and high voltage grids. You should really have a methodology. Sometimes it will be better to invest. Sometimes it will be better to procure flexibility depending on the local situation, which can also change. So this methodology, and at which level is it better for society to invest, or is it better to procure flexibility or to have another form of flexibility? It's really something that will be very interesting to see how all the countries implement it, I think.
I fully
and
share,
one other point I wanted to make was that it was not part of the paper, but something very interesting to compare as well is the relation between explicit flexibility or tariffs and dynamic price contracts. So I mean supplier dynamic price contracts, because those incentives can be completely different as well. So it would be interesting to research that in the future.
Thank you, Pauline. And indeed, Atir, I think, is well aware that we still have a few more issues to research. Maybe that's also connected to the question of Annette. Annette is saying, Atir, are you only going to do modeling, or are you also going to do more case experience based research? So that's a nice opening for you to maybe give a few hints to where your research will take you next.
Well, I think in this part, in the first stage, we did the contribution modeling, and also we tried to make the case study a bit like with the input data of Belgium. But yeah, we cannot say that the result apply for Belgium, but we rather wanted to show how this modeling approach could give and how these different parameters interact with each other. Yeah, for the next step, we were discussing either to focus on another type of gaming next to the compensation, which is the gaming of the baseline, or to include, as Pauline said, the interaction with other type of flexibility tools that could be used, and that are mentioned in the SEER report. So yeah, it's always there is always different a decision to be made on which direction to go. And yeah, we are discussing this in these days, actually.
Okay, thank you. And as soon as you mention tariffs, you of course get some more very specific questions about tariffs, which is always a controversial topic. So let me just pick up one by Frank, who asks, why should generation largely be exempt from network tariffs? Who would like to react to that? If I have no one volunteering, I can ask Tim, because Tim, his whole PhD is about tariffs. So Tim.
Why should
generation be exempt from tariffs?
But they are not necessarily exempt. I think at transmission level, there's a cap on the generation transmission tariff that they have to pay, the G charge. So that's okay. At distribution level, I think what the clean energy package says is that we cannot discriminate between demand and generation, because both can be solutions to solve certain issues. And therefore, if you would exempt generation, then you have to put it on demand, but both are somehow in some markets competing to be a solution. So therefore, I wonder whether exempting generation would not somehow be not in line with what is said there about non-discriminatory between different voltage levels and between different resources. On the other hand, if you would have high network tariffs on generation, you would probably hit PV quite hard, and that's probably not really in line with the green goals we have. So therefore, it's more of this a policy choice than really a kind of a regulatory economic type of discussion. That would be my very nuanced answer to the question.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Pauline or Jorgen, you want to come in?
Yeah, I can say it's quite normal with the feed-in tariff for production, but in Norway we have an exempt for so-called prosumers who feed in less than 100 kilowatts, because they will not have the feed-in tariff, but they will have the regular demand tariff.
Okay, but you have both tariffs for generation and for consumption, distribution tariffs. Yeah. Okay. Pauline?
I am not an expert on tariffs. I am an expert on flexibility. So I prefer not to give an opinion on that one.
It's a very slippery slope. Tim, you can say the final word on tariffs and then we move on.
No, I was thinking that if you would have cost-reflective tariffs and you would have an issue with a lot of PV in-feed at a certain place in the grid, then it would be cost-reflective to charge network charges to this in-feed. So a cost-reflective network tariff should be independent what direction of the flows there are. So in that sense, it could be that you somehow charge generation. I think very important would be predictability, because if you do an investment in, let's say, a PV farm, and then suddenly they charge injection fees for the network, that's probably going to create some regulatory uncertainty and would be bad for future business cases. So predictability may be more important than anything else at that level.
Thank you, Tim. And I think we can close here. So let me just close by sharing you what's next. So if you like the topic of flexibility, you might also like one of these two elements here. So we are part of the project interface. As Tim mentioned, one of the publications of today was done in the context of that project. As you can see, it only just started. Well, already more than a year, but it lasts 4 years. So we will continue to work on this with our partners. Interface is one of these projects where you will have demos on flexibility markets and also thinking on how these standardized products should look like. So please engage with us if this interests you. If you're less interested in research, but maybe more in training on this topic, know that we are starting very soon now, next week or the week after is already this course we have. It used to be called our course on network codes, but we changed the name because now electricity markets are not only evolving because of network codes, but also because of the clean energy package. So, and the clean energy package foresees a second generation of network codes, and one of them is flexibility. So we continue to talk about that topic also in that training. And as I said in the beginning, you can also simply subscribe to this series of online events. So if we don't see you back in training or in research, we might just see you back here every Wednesday around 2 o'clock. We have our online event series. So I'll also conclude by thanking our two researchers, Atir, Tim, and our two guests, Pauline, Jorgen. Thanks for being here with us. Thank you all, and see you soon again. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, thank you.